The city lights glittered like scattered diamonds against the midnight sky. But to Alexander Whitmore, they were nothing more than a reflection of his emptiness. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, he could see the empire he had built, the towers that bore his name, the skyline shaped by his deals. And yet, it brought him no warmth. At 35, Alexander was the kind of man people whispered about in awe and fear. The white American billionaire who had turned a family company into a global powerhouse. The ruthless CEO who could dismantle a competitor before they even saw the attack coming. The man whose icy blue eyes could make seasoned executives forget their names. But power was the only thing he trusted. Not love. Never love. That belief had been carved into him long before his first million, long before the media called him untouchable. As a boy, he had watched his mother, elegant, adored, walk out of their modest home with her suitcases packed, chasing a wealthier man. He'd watched his father crumble, not from the loss of a wife, but from the shattering truth that love had been nothing more than a transaction. From that day, Alexander promised himself no woman would ever have that kind of power over him. Over the years, he kept that promise. Women came into his life, drawn by his money, looks, and influence, and he kept them all at arm's length. Expensive dinners, fleeting encounters, gifts that meant nothing, because they meant nothing to him. He had trained himself to see through every smile, every flutter of eyelashes, every whispered confession. Beauty was a mask, and behind it lay greed. Tonight should have been a night of triumph. He had just closed the largest acquisition in his career, a months-long war against a rival that ended in his total victory. The press would write about it for weeks. Investors would call it genius. And yet, he stood alone, one hand wrapped around a glass of 20-year-old scotch, staring out at the city as if it were a stranger. He didn't celebrate anymore. Wins felt like losses, fleeting, hollow, another tick on the game's scoreboard that no longer challenged him. In the sterile perfection of his penthouse, there was no laughter, no warmth, only silence. The world believed Alexander Whitmore had it all. But the truth? He had built walls so high that he no longer remembered what was on the other side. And that night, as the city pulsed below, something, or someone, was already moving toward him. A twist of fate he could never have predicted. A game he hadn't prepared for. A moment that would unravel everything he thought he knew about himself. I know you've heard stories about powerful men, about the lives they lead behind those glass walls. But trust me when I say, this one is different. What you're about to hear isn't just a story about a man and a woman. It's about a war between trust, betrayal, pride, and surrender. And if you've ever believed that some hearts are too frozen to feel, stay with me. Watch closely as the cracks begin to form. Before we step into the moment their worlds collide, tell me, have you ever looked at someone and felt your entire life tilt in a different direction? Leave your thoughts below. I'd love to know if you've ever been caught in that moment. And if you want to follow this story to the very end, where love and obsession dance on the same dangerous edge, make sure you stay connected. You won't want to miss what comes next. Alexander Whitmore's life is about to change forever, and so is hers. If you'd like, I can continue with part 2 immediately so the tension builds without losing momentum. The scene where Lucas Crane sets the trap. That will make the hook even stronger for YouTube storytelling. Do you want me to move straight into part 2? Across town, in an office lined with mahogany and lit by the warm glow of amber liquor, Lucas Crane sat behind his desk like a man savoring the last move in a long, calculated game. Lucas was everything Alexander Whitmore despised in a man. Charming without effort, dangerous without conscience, and patient enough to let his enemies dig their graves. His empire had been built in the shadows of Alexander's success, always a step behind, always hungering for the moment he could turn the tide. And tonight, he believed that moment had come. For months, Lucas had watched Alexander dismantle one rival after another with clinical precision. He had seen the man walk away from the kind of women most men would lose themselves for, women whose beauty was their weapon. But Lucas knew Alexander's weakness wasn't lust. It was the hatred of being played. So Lucas decided to play with him. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. A woman, handpicked from the most exclusive escort circle, would be sent to Alexander's penthouse under the guise of a congratulatory gift from a business associate. Lucas didn't need Alexander to touch her. He just needed him to be seen with her. One photograph, a single, damning image, could be enough to tarnish the pristine control Alexander had over his public image. But Lucas was aiming for more than public scandal. He wanted to watch Alexander burn from the inside out, to watch that calm composure crack when he realized he had been baited like a fool. As he poured another glass of whiskey, Lucas's phone buzzed. His contact had sent a photo of the woman, a vision of glamour wrapped in red silk. She would be the perfect temptation, the perfect insult. Or so he thought. Fate, however, had its script. While Lucas finalized the arrangement, Naomi Carter was across the city, ending her shift at a boutique hotel. She was exhausted, but content in how people are when life is simple, if not easy. Naomi was the kind of woman who turned heads without meaning to. Deep, brown skin that glowed under soft light, a natural elegance in how she moved, and eyes that carried warmth and strength. She wasn't the kind of beauty that asked for attention. It followed her quietly, like a shadow. Her phone buzzed with a message from her friend Tasha. "Can you do me a favor? I left something at the Grand Imperial. It's at the front desk. They'll give it to you." Naomi hesitated. The Grand Imperial wasn't far, but it was a hotel that seemed to belong to another world, one she'd only ever seen from the outside. Still, she agreed. She had a generous streak that often landed her in the middle of situations she never intended to be part of. When she arrived, the marble lobby was nearly deserted. The concierge handed her a small package, and Naomi was about to leave when two men in dark suits approached. "You're here for the Penthouse delivery?" one of them asked. Confused, she shook her head. "No, I think—" "Follow us," the other interrupted, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. Before Naomi could protest, she was ushered into a private elevator. Her pulse quickened. The mirrored walls reflected her uneasy expression, her fingers clutching the package like an anchor. Something was wrong. The doors slid open to reveal a corridor lined with soft golden lights, leading to a single set of double doors. One of the men swiped a key card, opened the door, and gestured for her to go inside. It was a suite unlike anything she had ever seen. Soaring ceilings, walls of glass revealing the glittering city below, and the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. And then she saw him. Alexander Whitmore stood near the bar, his back to her, the sharp lines of his suit cutting a striking silhouette. He turned slowly, and in that instant, the room seemed to shrink. His eyes, cold, assessing, locked onto her. Naomi's breath caught. She didn't know his name but knew his type. Powerful, untouchable, the kind of man whose presence was a storm. But she couldn't see the thought moving through his mind like a blade. So this is how they want to play it. Lucas Crane's plan was already in motion. The problem was that Naomi Carter wasn't part of it, and neither of them knew it yet. But they were about to become the center of a game far more dangerous than either imagined. If you'd like, I can move straight into part 3, the moment of dangerous misunderstanding where Alexander confronts Naomi. so the emotional tension spikes immediately. This will keep the momentum gripping for your audience. Would you like me to continue with that? For a moment, neither of them moved. Naomi stood in the center of the opulent suite, her fingers tightening around the small package she had been holding since the lobby, her pulse thrumming in her ears. Alexander's gaze swept over her in one slow, measured pass, and though his expression didn't change, something between them shifted. Heavier, charged, edged with suspicion. She opened her mouth to explain, but his voice cut through the silence, low and precise, every word sharpened to a blade. So this is what they're sending me now. Naomi blinked, startled. I think there's been a— Spare me the act, Alexander interrupted, his tone threaded with a quiet, lethal authority. He moved toward her, unhurried but unrelenting, the soft click of his shoes on marble echoing like a countdown. I know exactly what you're here for. Her brows knit in confusion. I'm just here to— Collect a payday? His mouth curved into a humorless smirk. Tell Lucas he'll have to try harder than this. The name meant nothing to her, but how he said it, like a curse, sent a shiver down her spine. She took a step back instinctively, the package still clutched to her chest. I don't know who that is. I think you've mistaken— He stopped just in front of her, close enough for her to see the glint of steel in his eyes. Mistaken? His voice was deceptively soft now, almost a whisper, but there was no gentleness. Women like you don't just wander into rooms like this by accident. Naomi's heart kicked against her ribs. I'm not— An escort? He supplied, his gaze flicking briefly to the hem of her simple dress, to the bare line of her collarbone. No? Then tell me, what exactly are you? The question was a trap, she realized. No matter how she answered, he had already decided who she was. She forced herself to meet his stare, even as the weight of it made her want to look away. I'm here because someone asked me to pick up a package, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. That's all. I don't even know you. Something in his jaw tightened, but he didn't move back. You expect me to believe that? That you just ended up here? In my suite? At this exact moment? It's the truth, she insisted, her fingers trembling. He studied her in silence, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but searching, probing for cracks. And yet, his mind had already sealed its verdict. He had seen too many eyes like hers, wide, earnest, just on the edge of pleading, and he knew how easily they turned sharp when the game was up. Except, there was something different here. Her perfume wasn't the heavy sweetness of someone who came prepared to seduce. Her dress was modest, almost plain, and her shoes, flats, worn at the heel, didn't belong to the world of women who circled men like him. Still, pride was louder than instinct. You can drop the innocent act, he said at last, his tone regaining that glacial composure. It won't work on me. Naomi's frustration sparked, cutting through her fear. I'm not acting, she said, sharper than she intended. I don't know what game you think is being played here, but I'm not part of it. Alexander's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to something darker. Then you walked into the wrong man's den, Naomi Carter. The sound of her name from his lips startled her. She hadn't given it to him. It reminded her of who she was dealing with. A man who could know everything about a person before they even crossed his threshold. She swallowed hard. Then, let me leave. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. Oh, you'll leave, but not until I decide you're no longer useful. Her breath caught the meaning behind his words, a shadow she didn't want to name. She stepped back, only to feel the cool, unyielding glass wall at her spine. He was close again, not touching, but the heat of his presence was suffocating. Somewhere, a voice in her head screamed at her to push past him, run, and get out. But another, quieter voice whispered that she had just stepped into something she couldn't outrun. Not tonight or ever. The sharp click of the door locking behind her echoed louder than Naomi's pounding heartbeat. She swallowed a gasp, her fingers trembling as she pressed them against the cold glass wall. There was no turning back now. Alexander Whitmore stood inches away, his shadow falling over her like a dark promise. His sharp eyes, so accustomed to commanding boardrooms and crushing rivals, now bore down on her with an intensity that made her feel impossibly small. "You think this is a game?" he said quietly, voice like steel softened by ice. "That you can just walk in, say a few words, and walk right back out? But I don't play that way." Naomi's breath caught. She wanted to protest, explain, and shout that she was innocent and had no part in whatever scheme this was. But the words felt hollow, swallowed by the weight of his gaze. He reached out, not harshly, but with a cold determination that sent a shiver down her spine. His hand brushed against hers as he took the package from her grip, setting it carefully aside. "I've been lied to before," he murmured, eyes never leaving hers. Women who bat their lashes and smile sweetly, only to twist the knife later. Naomi's heart ached, not just from his suspicion, but from the loneliness she saw lurking beneath his rugged exterior. She understood now. This wasn't just anger, but a wall built from years of betrayal and pain. "I'm not here to hurt you," she whispered, voice barely audible. "Maybe not," he said, stepping closer so that the heat of his presence enveloped her. "But I don't intend to let you hurt me either." His words were a warning, but also a declaration. Naomi trembled, her mind racing for an escape, for any opening, but found none. She was trapped, not just by the locked doors, but by the storm in his eyes. He studied her face, tracing every flicker of emotion, fear, defiance, confusion, as if trying to read a book with pages that refused to stay still. "I don't want to break you," he said suddenly, voice softer, almost vulnerable. "But if you won't tell me the truth, I will find it alone." The room seemed to close in around them. The city lights blurred into distant stars, and all that remained was the charged space between two souls caught in an unforgiving dance. Naomi's eyes welled with tears, not from surrender, but from the raw pain of being misunderstood and seen as an enemy rather than a person. "I'm not your enemy," she breathed. "I'm not what you think." He lifted a hand to her cheek, fingers trembling slightly, uncertain whether to caress or command. The gentleness of the touch was at odds with the steel in his gaze. "Prove it," he whispered. That single word hung between them, a fragile hope woven through a tapestry of doubt. Naomi closed her eyes, took a steadying breath, and they shone with fierce determination when she opened them again. "I'm not here to deceive you," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "And I'm not afraid of you." Alexander's lips parted, the ghost of a smile flickering. For a fleeting moment, the ruthless CEO softened into a man desperate to believe. But the night was far from over, because tonight, the lesson had just begun. If you want me to continue building on this, Part 6 will deepen their fraught interaction, weaving tension, vulnerability, and the slow unraveling of their barriers. Just say the word. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass, but Naomi saw none. Her back was pressed against the cool pane, the night air visible in shimmering lights far below, while Alexander Whitmore stood before her, his frame a wall she couldn't move past. He didn't touch her. Not yet. But how he looked at her, like a man assessing the worth of a rare, possibly dangerous object, made the space between them feel like a blade's edge. "Do you know what I hate most, Miss Carter?" His voice was calm, almost conversational, but it was the kind of calm that came before a storm. Naomi swallowed. "I told you." "Lies," he interrupted softly, almost politely. "What I hate most is being lied to." Her pulse thudded in her ears. "I'm not lying." "You are," he said without hesitation, as if the truth were already decided. "Or, at the very least, you're hiding something, and people who hide things from me usually learn the cost of it." He stepped closer, each measured pace drawing the air tighter around her. The scent of his crisp, expensive, understated cologne reached her before the faint heat radiated from his body. Naomi's grip tightened on the package in her hands. "I'm not here to hide anything from you. I didn't even know whose suite this was until I walked in." Alexander's gaze flicked briefly to her trembling fingers. "Then perhaps I should make this clear," he murmured, his voice lowering until she could feel it more than hear it. "If this is some ploy, some scheme to corner me, you'll regret stepping into this room. And if it's not, you'll still regret it for letting yourself be caught in someone else's game." "I don't play games," she said, her voice breaking but steady enough to hold his eyes. "That's the problem," he replied, and the faint curve at the corner of his mouth was nothing like a smile. "You think you're not playing, but you are, and you're in the wrong arena." Something in the way he said it, the certainty, the detachment, stirred a flicker of defiance in her. She straightened her spine. "You don't know me." His gaze deepened, studying her as she'd just said something foolish. "I know enough. Enough to see through the performance." Naomi's breath came faster, each inhale tightening the knot in her chest. "There's no performance." Alexander tilted his head, his tone a whisper that somehow held more weight than a shout. "Then let me be the judge of that." It was not an offer. In that moment, she understood something dangerous. This man had no intention of taking her words at face value. He would pry, push, and corner until he decided what truth would be, whether or not it was hers. "You came here for a reason," he said quietly, his hand lifting to rest against the glass beside her head. He didn't touch her, but the nearness made her skin hum with awareness. "And you'll show me what that reason is." "I'm leaving," Naomi whispered, trying to sidestep him. But Alexander shifted with her, a predator's grace in the way he blocked her path without seeming rushed. "Not until I decide you've earned that privilege." Her heart pounded. "Privilege?" "Yes," he said, his voice steady, his eyes unreadable. "Leaving this room is a privilege. I'm not accustomed to granting to people I don't trust." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. Then, almost imperceptibly, his voice changed. Softer, but edged with something more dangerous. "You'll stay, Miss Carter, and you'll learn," he said, "one way or another." A chill traced down Naomi's spine. She didn't know if it was the threat in his words or the strange pull in his voice, but she knew this. She had walked into a place she didn't belong, and the man standing before her had no intention of letting her walk back out the same. The suite was bathed in a muted glow, the soft hum of the city a distant lullaby beyond the thick glass walls. Yet inside, the air between Alexander Whitmore and Naomi Carter was electric, taut with unspoken truths and dangerous silences. Alexander's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, a crack in the armor he had spent years forging. He studied her trembling form, the way her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, the glistening tears that threatened to spill but were swallowed back fiercely. He stepped back, as if to give her space, yet the weight of his presence filled every corner of the room. "I want to believe you," he admitted quietly, the words strange and foreign on his tongue. "But trust isn't given. It's earned. Naomi's eyes met his, fierce and unyielding, despite the fear that lingered beneath. "Then don't take it from me," she whispered. "Watch, learn, see who I am beyond your suspicions." A slow breath escaped Alexander, his mind a whirlwind of contradictions. Here was a woman unlike those he had known, no calculated smiles, no practiced charms, just raw, vulnerable humanity. Yet the ghosts of his past whispered warnings, weaving doubt like a poison in his veins. Could he allow himself to hope, to open a door that had long been sealed? Naomi moved first, tentative steps that spoke of courage masked in uncertainty. She approached the window, looking out at the city lights, a mosaic of stories, dreams, and lives intersecting in endless complexity. "I'm not a pawn," she said softly. "Not for you, not for anyone." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "No one is a pawn here," he said, voice low. "Not if I have anything to say about it." The words hung between them, a promise and a challenge simultaneously. Time seemed to fold inward, and for a moment, the ruthless CEO and the frightened girl were just two souls, searching for something neither dared to name. "I've been betrayed," Alexander confessed, his voice rough with old wounds. "By people I trusted, by those I thought cared." Naomi turned, surprise flickering across her features. "I'm sorry." He shook his head slowly, a bitter smile touching his lips. "Sorry doesn't fix broken trust. It doesn't heal scars left by lies." Her gaze softened. "Then, maybe, trust is something we build together, step by step." He studied her again, that spark of something fragile and new stirring deep within. As the night deepened, they shared fragments of themselves, stories told in half-spoken words, confessions veiled in silence. And beneath the cold walls Alexander had built, something began to thaw. But the path ahead was treacherous. Suspicion lingered like a shadow, and outside forces waited, ready to exploit every weakness. For now, two broken hearts dared to reach for a fragile hope in this quiet moment. And the game was far from over. Days blurred into restless nights, and the walls of Alexander Whitmore's penthouse seemed to pulse with an unspoken tension that neither could ignore. Naomi felt it in the way his gaze lingered too long, and the air shifted when they were near. A fragile dance between wariness and something dangerously close to trusting. But a storm was brewing beneath Alexander's commanding exterior, one he hadn't prepared for and couldn't contain. During one of those long, silent evenings, the truth broke free, not with a dramatic confession, but in the quiet, vulnerable moments that pierced the strongest armor. Naomi had retreated to the far corner of the suite, wrapped in a soft shawl that barely contained the tremor in her hands. She had spent hours staring at the cityscape, tracing invisible patterns in the constellation of lights. Alexander found her there, shoulders hunched and eyes distant. "Naomi," he said gently, stepping close, but careful not to overwhelm. "There's something you need to tell me." She looked up, the weight of her secret pressing in like a tide. Silence stretched between them for a moment, thick, suffocating, filled with the anticipation that precedes a storm. "I'm not who you think I am," she whispered. He frowned, a shadow crossing his features. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I wasn't supposed to be here tonight. I was pushed into that elevator against my will. I didn't agree to any of this." The words hit him like a physical blow. He had accused her, judged her, and condemned her without pause. And now, the fragile illusion he'd held about control was cracking under the weight of reality. You weren't sent to trap me? His voice was rough, and his disbelief and regret were tangled together. No, she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'm innocent, Alex. I've never lived a life like that. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. For the first time, Alexander's defenses wavered. The walls he had built so carefully and ruthlessly began to crumble. He stepped closer, searching her face for any sign of deceit, but all he found was truth. Raw, unfiltered, heartbreaking. I believed you were playing me, he admitted quietly. That you were another mask, another lie. Naomi's lips trembled. I wish I could have told you sooner. I wanted to, but I was scared. Scared you'd never believe me. His fingers reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face with unexpected tenderness. Why didn't you trust me? Because you didn't trust me, she whispered back. The admission hung between them, fragile yet profound. Two souls wounded by past betrayals, afraid to open themselves to the possibility of being hurt again. Alexander's gaze softened, the fire of suspicion giving way to a flicker of something new. Hope. I'm sorry, he said, voice low but sincere. For doubting you. For everything. Naomi's breath hitched, the barriers around her heart trembling. I don't know if I can forgive you yet. He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I don't expect you to, but I want to earn that forgiveness, step by step. And in that moment, the fragile threads of trust began to weave a new story, one where truth might heal wounds and love might find a way through the darkest nights. But outside their sanctuary, shadows stirred. The enemies who sought to destroy Alexander waited patiently, ready to strike at the first sign of weakness. And the game was far from over. The days followed were a fragile tapestry, woven from tentative moments and unspoken fears. Naomi found herself walking a tightrope between hope and hesitation, while Alexander grappled with the unfamiliar ache of vulnerability. Their worlds had collided in a storm, yet a cautious peace began to settle in the eye of it all. But peace in Alexander Whitmore's life was a fleeting illusion. Late one evening, as the city lights flickered against the deep velvet sky, a quiet knock disturbed the stillness of the penthouse. Alexander opened the door to find a familiar face lurking in the shadows. Lucas Crane, his rival and architect of the twisted game that had ensnared Naomi. Lucas's smile was a serpent's grin, smooth and venomous. I see you've kept her close, he said, stepping inside without invitation. His eyes darted to Naomi, standing behind Alexander, her expression guarded but unyielding. Alexander's jaw clenched. What do you want, Lucas? Only what's mine, Lucas replied smoothly, voice laced with dark amusement. Naomi doesn't belong here, Alex. You know that. She's your weakness, and I'm here to take it away. Naomi's breath caught. For the first time since their worlds had collided, she saw the full extent of the danger that loomed, not just from the man who held her captive, but from the one who sought to claim her as a prize in their ruthless war. Alexander stepped forward, the cool steel of his gaze turning lethal. You'll find. I don't lose. Lucas laughed softly, the sound echoing off the marble walls. We'll see about that. As Lucas turned to leave, Naomi's voice trembled. Why are you doing this? Why do you hate him so much? Lucas paused, glancing back with a twisted sincerity. Because he took what I wanted, and because he's not the man you think he is. The words planted doubt and fear within Naomi, twisting her fragile trust into knots. That night, as Alexander stood beside her, watching the city's endless expanse, he vowed silently to protect her from the shadows, no matter the cost. But protection came at a price. The battle for Naomi's heart was only beginning, and neither man was willing to surrender. The days that followed were a careful dance, one measured in glances stolen across crowded rooms, in conversations heavy with meaning, yet light in words. Naomi and Alexander both felt the unsteady tremors of a bond forming in the ruins of suspicion and fear. Alexander was a man accustomed to control, ruthless, commanding, a titan in his domain. But with Naomi, every instinct to dominate faltered beneath a strange new vulnerability. She was not a conquest to be claimed, but a mystery to be unraveled, a fragile heart to be guarded. Naomi, for her part, lived in the tension of longing and wariness. The scars of mistrust ran deep. The past had taught her to hide, to protect her heart with walls forged from pain. Yet, Alexander's careful gentleness chipped away at those defenses, awakening emotions she hadn't dared to name. One evening, as a soft rain traced silver veins against the window pane, Alexander found her in the study, the room dimly lit by the flickering flame of a single candle. She looked up as he entered, the shadows dancing across her face, illuminating a vulnerability she usually concealed. "Can I sit with you?" he asked, voice low and tentative. She nodded, and he sat beside her, careful not to crowd the fragile space between. "I know I've been difficult," Alexander began, struggling with the unfamiliar terrain of apology. "But you must understand, trusting someone is not easy for me, not after everything." Naomi's eyes softened. "I'm not asking you to trust me blindly," she replied gently, "but I want to try to build something real, step by step." Their hands brushed, a fleeting contact that sent a shiver through them both. It was an unspoken promise, a beginning rather than an end. But peace was elusive. The storm outside their fragile haven raged on, as Lucas Crane's presence lingered like a dark cloud. One afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up quietly as Naomi walked through the estate's sprawling gardens. The door opened, and Lucas stepped out with his inviting and dangerous smile. "Naomi," he said smoothly, his voice like silk, "you don't belong in his world. You're suffocating under his control." Naomi squared her shoulders, refusing to show fear. "He's not my captor." Lucas's gaze hardened. "He thinks he owns you, but ownership is an illusion. You deserve freedom, a life without chains." Naomi's heart twisted. The words stirred a conflict she hadn't expected, a yearning for freedom, battling the strange, undeniable pull toward Alexander. "Why do you want to help me?" she asked, suspicion coloring her tone. Lucas shrugged, eyes darkening. "Because I hate him, and taking you away would be my sweetest revenge." The garden seemed to close around her, the choice between two worlds, safety or escape, love or independence, weighing heavier than ever. Later that night, Naomi confided in Alexander, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lucas visited me today. He says I don't belong here." Alexander's jaw clenched, his hands tightening into fists. "He'll regret crossing this line." She looked up at him, searching for the man beneath the fury. "I don't want to be a prize in your war." He softened, reaching for her hand with a gentleness that belied the storm in his eyes. "You're not a prize, Naomi. You're the only thing worth fighting for." In that moment, the delicate balance between power and desire shifted, tilting towards something neither of them could deny: love. But the path ahead was perilous, and the battle for Naomi's heart was only beginning. The grand estate was alive with the muted buzz of an exclusive gathering, chandeliers casting golden light on impeccably dressed guests, the murmur of conversations blending with the clink of crystal glasses. But beneath the surface of elegance and charm, a tempest was brewing. Alexander Whitmore strode through the marble halls with purposeful strides, every eye drawn to the presence of the man who commanded power like a king. His jaw was set, eyes sharp as daggers, because tonight, it wasn't business that consumed him. It was the war for Naomi's heart and freedom. Lucas Crane stood in the corner of the room, who had haunted Alexander's every move since Naomi's arrival. Dressed in a tailored black suit, Lucas wore a confident smirk, his gaze fixed on Naomi, who stood beside him, her expression a mixture of apprehension and quiet defiance. "Enjoying the evening?" Lucas asked smoothly, his voice a silken challenge. Naomi's eyes flickered to Alexander, then back to Lucas. "I'm not here to play your games," she said softly but firmly. Lucas chuckled darkly. "Ah, you're already a piece on the board, Naomi, and I intend to make my move." Before Naomi could respond, Alexander appeared beside her, his hand closing possessively around her wrist. His voice was low, edged with restrained fury. "You belong with me." The crowd seemed to part as tension thickened like fog. Whispers spread. Alexander Whitmore, the ruthless billionaire, claimed ownership of a woman amid a glittering gala. Lucas stepped forward, eyes flashing with malice. "You think possession equals love, Alexander? She's not a trophy to flaunt." Alexander's gaze locked onto Lucas's, the air crackling with unspoken threats. "She's not yours to claim. Stay away, Lucas." The room held its breath as the two men circled, a silent battle raging beneath their calm facades. Suddenly, Alexander's fist connected with Lucas's jaw in a swift, brutal strike. The impact echoed through the hall, gasps rising like a wave. Lucas stumbled back, blood glistening on his lip, his smile replaced by a sharp glare. "Touch her again, and you'll regret it," Alexander warned, voice cold and deadly. Naomi's heart pounded wildly. Caught between fear and a flicker of hope, she looked up at Alexander, seeing not just a titan of industry, but a man fiercely guarding what mattered most. Lucas wiped the blood from his lip, his gaze darkening. "You think this ends tonight? This is far from over." Alexander's grip on Naomi's hand tightened. "Then let the war begin." As the gala resumed, the fragile balance shattered, replaced by a battle not just of wealth and power, but of love, trust, and redemption. Naomi felt the weight of their world pressing down, yet amid the chaos, a singular truth emerged. Her heart belonged to no one but Alexander, and she would fight alongside him, no matter the cost. The echoes of the gala's confrontation lingered long after the guests had dispersed, leaving a heavy silence to settle over the grand estate. The air was thick with unspoken emotions, and the fragile tension of battles fought not just in the boardrooms, but in the heart's chambers. Naomi retreated to the sanctuary of her room, the weight of the evening pressing on her chest like a silent storm. She pressed her back against the door, sliding down to the floor, breath shaky, mind racing. The violence of Alexander's defense, the strength he wielded not as a conqueror, but as a protector, awoke something deep inside her. She had seen the fierce fire in his eyes, the raw urgency to guard what he claimed as his own. Yet beneath that storm lay a vulnerability she hadn't expected, a man battling his fears and regrets. Alexander stood outside the door, his hand poised hesitantly. He debated whether to enter for a long moment, afraid his presence might shatter the fragile space Naomi had carved out. Finally, the door creaked open, and he stepped inside, the soft glow of the bedside lamp casting gentle shadows on his face. His eyes sought hers, searching for permission, for acceptance. "I didn't want to frighten you," he said quietly, voice low and regretful. Naomi's gaze met his, a flicker of warmth amidst the lingering fear. "You didn't." He moved closer, the distance between them shrinking with each heartbeat. "But I realize how much I've scared you." how much I've made you doubt." She reached out, her fingers brushing against his cheek, a tentative touch that spoke volumes. It's hard to believe when trust has been broken many times. Alexander closed his eyes, savoring the gentleness of her hand. "Then I'll spend every day proving to you that I'm not the man you feared." Naomi's breath caught, the sincerity in his words unraveling the knots in her heart. "I want to believe that." Their lips met in a kiss, soft and searching, a promise whispered in the quiet. It was a kiss that held the weight of apologies and the hope of new beginnings. In that moment, the walls they had built, hers of caution, his of pride, began to crumble, brick by brick. But healing was not a straight path. Shadows from the past and threats from the outside world still lurked, reminding them that love, especially theirs, was a fragile bloom in a garden of thorns. As they pulled apart, Alexander's fingers entwined with Naomi's, holding on as if to anchor them both. "We're in this together," he vowed, "whatever comes." Naomi nodded, the warmth of his hand steadying the flutter of her heart. Together. Outside the window, the city lights flickered, a silent witness to a night where two souls, battered but unbroken, chose to face the unknown hand in hand. The days that followed the gala's storm were steeped in a fragile quietude, a tentative truce forged between two souls still navigating the labyrinth of pain and longing. Alexander and Naomi found themselves suspended in a delicate balance, yearning to close the distance, yet wary of the wounds beneath their skin. In the soft morning light, Naomi would sit by the expansive windows, watching the city awaken in hues of gold and rose. Sometimes, Alexander would join her silently, his presence a steadying force that spoke louder than words. Yet, beneath the surface, the quiet was often punctuated by the unspoken fears that neither dared voice. One afternoon, as a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine through the open balcony doors, Naomi confronted the shadows that haunted her heart. "Alex," she began, her voice trembling with the weight of her confession, "I want to trust you, truly. But there are parts of me that still hesitate. The past, it doesn't just fade away, Ade." Alexander's gaze softened, his fingers finding hers across the polished glass table. "I know," he whispered, "and I don't expect you to forget. I only want you to know that I'm here, not just as the man who made mistakes, but as the one who wants to make things right." She searched his eyes, finding a deep sincerity that stirred something long dormant within her. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I wonder if I'm just a chapter in your life. Something temporary you'll close when the story becomes inconvenient." He squeezed her hand gently. "You're not a chapter, Naomi. You're the beginning of a story I never thought I'd have the courage to write." Their eyes locked, and a fragile thread of hope wove between them in that moment. Fragile, yet unbreakable. But even as trust began to take root, the world outside conspired to unravel it. News of the gala's confrontation spread like wildfire, stirring whispers in boardrooms and shadowed corners. Ever the opportunist, Lucas Crane intensified his campaign to claim Naomi, not just as a prize, but as a weapon against Alexander. One evening, as twilight bled into night, Naomi received a message, a line dripping with menace. "You can't hide from the truth forever." The words sent a chill through her, reigniting the fears she had fought to quell. She shared the message with Alexander, whose jaw tightened with resolve. "He's trying to scare you, to break us apart." Naomi nodded, her gaze steeling with determination. "He won't win. Not if we face this together." Alexander pulled her close, his voice a vow. "We will, no matter what comes." Their embrace was a fortress against the encroaching storm, a silent declaration that their hearts were bound despite the shadows and doubts. Yet, beneath the surface, the battle for Naomi's soul had only just begun. The night wrapped around the city like a velvet shroud. Yet within the sanctuary of Alexander Whitmore's estate, the air crackled with a tension neither warmth nor distance could ease. Naomi lay on the edge of the grand bed, her eyes tracing the shadows that danced across the ceiling. The soft hum of the rain against the windows was a lullaby that barely masked the storm raging within her heart. Alexander stood nearby, watching her with an intense gaze that threatened to unravel every thread of her carefully guarded composure. He crossed the room silently, the familiar scent of his cologne enveloping her like a heady whisper. Kneeling beside her, he reached out, his fingers trembling ever so slightly as they brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. "Naomi," he whispered, his voice thick with unspoken emotion. "You have no idea what you've become to me." She turned to face him, the flicker of vulnerability in her eyes betraying the steel she tried so hard to wear. "I'm not sure what I've become anymore," she confessed. Alexander's hand cupped her cheek, his touch both tender and possessive. "More than anyone you've ever known. You're my salvation and my downfall." Her breath hitched at the confession, the weight of his words sinking deep into her soul. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. "Scared of losing myself in this. In you." He leaned in, his forehead resting gently against hers. "There's a thin line between love and obsession," he murmured, "and I'm terrified of crossing it." Naomi's fingers found his, entwining tightly, as if to anchor them to their shared fragile reality. "Maybe," she said, voice barely audible, "but sometimes the most beautiful things bloom where the line is blurred." Their kiss was slow, a tender collision of hope and fear, a dance that spoke of promises yet to be made and battles yet to be won. But beneath the fragile veneer of their growing closeness, the shadows of past wounds and looming threats lurked, ready to test the strength of their fragile union. For Alexander and Naomi, love was no longer just a refuge. It was a battlefield. The morning light filtered softly through the silken curtains, casting a gentle glow upon the quiet room where Naomi sat curled beneath a blanket, her thoughts a tangled web of hope and hesitation. She held a letter in her hands, a confession penned in trembling script, the kind of words that could shift the axis of a life. It was a secret she had guarded fiercely, a truth that had shaped her past and now threatened to unravel the fragile peace she was beginning to find with Alexander. The door opened quietly, and Alexander entered, the familiar silhouette framed by the morning light. His eyes immediately found the letter, then Naomi's tense expression. "Is this?" His voice was cautious, hesitant to cross boundaries she had not yet invited him to breach. Naomi met his gaze, the weight of her secret pressing down. "There's something you need to know," she said softly. "About me. About everything I've tried to hide." He sat beside her, the warmth of his presence a steady anchor in the storm of uncertainty. "Whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone." Her breath hitched as she handed him the letter, the vulnerability in her gesture, an unspoken plea for acceptance. Alexander read slowly, every word sinking deep into his heart. The story unfolded, of hardships endured, choices made in desperation, and a past far more complicated than he had imagined. When he finally looked up, his eyes were unreadable, a mixture of pain and something fiercely protective. "Naomi," he began, thick with emotion, "you could have told me. I would have stood by you." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was afraid. Afraid you'd see me differently, that you'd think less of me." He took her hands in his grip firm and reassuring. "Your past does not define you. You are who you are, and I choose to stand with you." But as the truth settled between them, so did the shadows of consequence. The secrets Naomi carried were not hers alone. They were threads in a larger tapestry of danger, drawing closer with every passing day. Outside the walls of their sanctuary, unseen eyes watched, waiting for the moment to strike and unravel everything they had fought to build. And within that waiting, the most significant test of their love loomed, a choice that would demand sacrifice, courage, and a faith stronger than either had ever known. The night was still, save for the faint rustle of leaves and the soft cadence of distant city lights, flickering like stars caught in glass. In the quiet sanctuary of Alexander Whitmore's estate, two souls stood on the precipice of a decision that would define their futures, together or apart. Naomi's heart beat wildly, an erratic rhythm that mirrored the storm of emotion surging beneath her composed exterior. Before her stood Alexander, his eyes locked onto hers with a depth that spoke of a love fierce enough to burn through doubt, yet gentle enough to heal every scar. He reached for her hand, his touch a lifeline, a promise carved in the silent space between them. "Naomi," he whispered, his voice raw with vulnerability, "you are the only truth I've ever known. I was lost before you. But with you, I've found a purpose I never dared to hope for." Her breath caught, tears shimmering at the corners of her eyes, reflecting the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the window. "I've been afraid," she confessed, voice trembling like a fragile melody. "Afraid that love could hurt me again, that trust was just an illusion." Alexander stepped closer, closing the distance until their breaths mingled, the warmth of his presence dispelling the cold shadows of her fears. "Love is never without risk," he said gently. "But it is also the bravest thing we can choose, and I'm willing to risk everything for you." Their lips met in a kiss that was at once tender and fierce, a dance of longing and forgiveness, a vow spoken without words. It was a kiss that sealed promises made in whispered breaths and heartfelt glances, a kiss that transformed two fractured hearts into one. Alexander reached into his pocket as they pulled apart, producing a small velvet box. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it to reveal a ring, a symbol of commitment, redemption, hope, and the unyielding power of love. "Naomi," he said, thick with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you be mine in moments of passion and all the coming days?" Tears spilled freely now. Her smile, radiant with the acceptance of a love she had once feared, was beyond reach. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steady with certainty. "Yes, Alexander, I will." At that moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the soft glow of their intertwined hands, the promise of a shared future, and the boundless depth of a love forged in the crucible of trials and triumphs. The battles they had faced, the shadows that still lingered, all faded into the background, eclipsed by the light of a love that had transformed them both. Together, they stepped forward, not as conqueror and captive, but as partners bound by trust, resilience, and a passion that would carry them through whatever storms lay ahead. And as the first light of dawn kissed the horizon, Naomi and Alexander embraced the beginning of their forever. I can help craft epilogues, character reflections, or alternate endings. Just let me know. The morning sun poured through the sheer curtains, bathing the room in a warm, golden light that seemed to promise new beginnings. Naomi stirred gently, her hand instinctively reaching out to the space beside her, finding Alexander already awake, watching her with eyes that held a universe of love and quiet awe. They looked at each other for a long moment, two souls once broken and bruised, now healed by the fire that threatened to consume them. Their journey had been anything but simple. It was a path marked by shadows and light, by trust earned in the smallest moments and battles fought in silence. A journey where love was not a fairy tale, but a fiercely guarded treasure, carved from pain, vulnerability, and unwavering devotion. Alexander brushed a stray curl from Naomi's face, his touch reverent, as if she were the rarest gems. "We made it," he whispered. Naomi smiled, her heart full beyond words. "Together," she replied softly. They rose, stepping into the day hand in hand, the weight of their past lifting with every breath they took toward the future. Their love had been tested by fire, tempered in trials, and emerged unbreakable, a testament to the power of forgiveness, resilience, and the courage to trust again. Outside, the world awaited with all its uncertainties and wonders, but within their embrace, there was only certainty that whatever storms might come, they would face them side by side. And so, their story continued, not as perfect lovers, but as two imperfect hearts who chose to be whole together. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in love that fights through darkness to find its light, please take a moment to like, share, and comment below. Your support means the world. It fuels the stories that remind us all that love, in its purest form, is the most incredible power we possess. Don't forget to subscribe and join us for more tales of passion, resilience, and the unforgettable journey of the heart. Because every story deserves to be told, and every love deserves to be celebrated. Thank you for being part of this journey.